The day they kick me out, it's raining. Not the soft kind. The kind that soaks through your boots and makes you wonder if the sky itself is laughing at you. I'm standing at the iron gate of the Ironveil Artisan Guild, the most powerful crafting institution in the entire kingdom of Sorath, and a clerk I've never spoken to in my life is handing me a wooden box with my tools inside it. Your membership has been revoked by unanimous vote of the Grand Masters, he says. He doesn't even look up from his ledger. And just like that, 5 years of my life are in a box. My name is Doran. For 5 years I was the guild's lowest ranked member. A rank 3 journeyman stuck in the slot right above apprentice, doing repair work, sharpening rich men's swords, fixing leaky water wheels for village lords who couldn't be bothered to learn the word please. Nobody cared much about me while I was here, but they cared plenty about getting rid of me. Because 3 days ago, I did something they could not forgive. I built something they had never seen before. It started as an accident. I was working a night shift in the lower forge, alone, the way I always was. The assignment was simple: repair a broken transport cart axle for one of the northern merchants. Standard job. 2 hours, maybe 3. Except when I picked up the axle to inspect it, the system spoke to me for the first time in my life. Right. I should explain the system. In this world, certain craftsmen are born with what's called a maker's core, an invisible thread of energy that connects them to the deep principles of construction. The maker's core lets you see the hidden structure of any object, the stress points, the grain of the wood, the crystalline pattern in the metal, the mathematical logic holding things together. Most craftsmen with a maker's core can see one category of objects. Guild masters, if they're exceptional, can see 2. I had never shown any signs of having a core. 5 years in the guild, and every annual test came back empty. They called me a dead stone, their lovely term for a craftsman with no system access whatsoever. A person who crafts purely through trained hands and muscle memory, with no enhancement, no shortcut, no edge. Every major commission went to someone else. Every promotion board passed me over. And now I understood why they kept me around at all. I was cheap labor who didn't complain, doing work the core users considered beneath them. But 3 days ago, when my hands touched that merchant's broken axle, something cracked open inside my chest. Not painful, more like a door that had been stuck suddenly swinging wide, and a voice, cold, mechanical, like someone speaking through a copper pipe, said, Maker's Core activated. Integration category, unconventional transit architecture, scanning current object. I had frozen solid. The axle in my hands began to glow, faintly, like a coal going from black to orange. And in my head, I could see it. Not just the axle, not just the cart, the entire concept of what this piece of metal could become if I let it. If I connected it to the right components, in the right sequence, at the right scale. My hands moved before I could think. 3 hours later, I had not repaired a cart. I had built the front assembly of something that had no name in this world. Iron wheels with flanged edges designed to lock onto a fixed track. A chassis that absorbed vibration through a layered spring system. A traction engine frame that, if completed with a compressed steam boiler, could pull several enclosed passenger cars down a pair of rail lines at a speed no horse-drawn vehicle could match. I didn't know what to call it. The system called it a rail transit unit. Prototype chassis, incomplete. I called it the strangest thing I'd ever touched. The guildmasters found it at dawn, and that was the end of my career. They didn't ask me how I did it. They didn't ask me what it was or what it could do. They looked at it the way wealthy men look at something they don't understand and therefore fear, with cold disgust and immediate decision. Grand Master Orvain, a man with arms like tree trunks and a beard that looked like it was made of iron filings, declared that what I had built was a perversion of the craft tradition. His exact words, a perversion, because it looked like nothing in the guild's 600 years of recorded blueprints. Because it followed no school of established crafting doctrine. Because it had come from a dead stone who wasn't supposed to be able to build anything at all. The vote was unanimous. And now I'm outside the iron gate, holding a box of basic tools, while a clerk who doesn't know my name writes, expelled, unauthorized construction, in his ledger. The rain gets heavier. Fine. I start walking. Here's the thing about being thrown out of the only institution that ever gave you a stable address. It forces clarity. I had saved some money. Not much, but enough. I had my tools. I had, apparently, a maker's core that had decided to show up about 5 years late. And I had absolutely nothing left to lose. I walked for 2 days, away from the capital city of Granthos, where the guild was headquartered, away from the merchant districts and the noble estates, and the cobblestone streets where people like me existed, to serve people unlike me. I walked north, following a river valley I had never explored, through terrain that got wilder and quieter the further I went. On the morning of the third day, I found it. A valley between two low mountains, roughly 2 kilometers wide, with the river running down its center. The soil looked dark and rich. Pine trees covered the slopes in every direction. No roads in or out, just an old game trail that deer had probably made before any human ever passed through. No villages for at least 4 hours' walk in any direction. Perfect. The system spoke the moment I stepped into the valley, and I nearly choked on my morning tea. Terrain assessment complete. This location is optimal for long-range rail infrastructure development. Recommended project: subterranean and surface transit network. Efficiency rating: excellent. Structural soil composition: suitable for tunnel excavation. Gradient angle: ideal for rail track laying. Do you wish to begin the primary build sequence? I looked around at the empty valley. A hawk was circling overhead. A fox was watching me from the tree line with one ear cocked like it thought I was being dramatic. Yes, I said. The system said, build sequence initiated. First recommended structure: transit workshop and materials processing station. So, not a subway first, a workshop first. Logical, actually. The Maker's Core was, I was quickly learning, extraordinarily organized. It didn't just show me what to build, it showed me exactly why, in what order, with what materials, and how each component would eventually connect to everything else. It was like having an architect living inside my skull who happened to know things that shouldn't exist in this world. I spent the first week building the workshop, not a grand structure. A solid stone building with a good roof, a forge chamber, a workbench system, and storage racks. The core guided my hands so precisely that every joint fit on the first attempt. Every wall came out level without a plumb line. Every beam seated with a satisfying solidity that no ruler check could improve on. I had spent 5 years fighting for decent results with ordinary hands. Now it was like the tools themselves understood what I wanted. On day 8, I caught a fish from the river and cooked it over my forge and ate it sitting on a stone outside my new workshop and watched the sun go down behind the western ridge. No one was yelling at me. No one was handing me a list of corrections. No one was explaining why my output failed to meet guild standards. It was the best meal of my life. But the valley had noticed me. People always do eventually. A girl from the farming settlement 4 hours south came through on day 12, following the river. She was maybe 17, small and fast-moving, with mud on her boots and a basket of herbs, and the specific wariness of someone who has learned to assess strangers quickly. Her name was Sheva, and she stopped 30 meters from my workshop and stared. "What is that?" she said. "A workshop," I said. "Why is it here?" "Because I built it here." She considered this for a moment. "Are you a hermit?" "Not deliberately," I said. "I was expelled from the Ironveil Guild." Her eyebrows went up. Then, unexpectedly, she laughed, short and bright. "The big one in Granthos? My uncle tried to join that guild for 7 years. Did he make it?" "No," she said. "They told him he had poor foundational discipline. They told me I was a dead stone." She looked at the workshop again, at the precise stonework, at the chimney I had built with triple-layer flue design so the smoke drew perfectly even in crosswind, at the window frames fitted so clean they didn't need latches to hold shut. "Doesn't look like a dead stone built that," she said. "The core woke up late," I said, 3 days before they threw me out. She stared at me for a long moment, then she said, "My name is Sheva. I'm from Millholt. We're a farming settlement, about 4 hours south. We have a lot of problems the guild's craftsmen charge too much to fix." That was how I got my first client. The problems in Millholt were real. Irrigation channels that clogged seasonally. A grain mill with a water wheel that wobbled and wasted half its mechanical energy. Storage buildings that let in moisture and ruined 3 seasons of grain in every 4. Road surfaces that turned to mud every spring and cracked every winter. Sheva walked me through the settlement on my first visit and listed the failures the way someone who had grown up watching them listed problems. Matter-of-factly, without drama, but with the specific exhaustion of a person who is tired of watching avoidable things keep happening. I fixed the water wheel first. One afternoon. The core showed me the eccentric wobble in the hub bearing, showed me the correct compensating weight placement, and I had it spinning true before dinner. The miller, an old man named Bertwick, watched with his arms crossed the entire time, like he expected me to fail. When the wheel ran smooth and steady, he uncrossed his arms. He didn't say anything. He went inside and came back with a jar of preserved plums and set it on my workbench without comment. I took that as payment. I also took it as a statement of character. Bertwick was the kind of man who needed to see the work done before he'd decide what he thought about it. That was fair. That was more than fair. That was actually more honesty than I'd gotten from the guild in 5 years. Over the next 3 weeks, I fixed the irrigation channels. Not just repaired them, redesigned the gradient system so they would self-clear during high flow and never require seasonal unclogging again. I rebuilt the storage barns with the Corps' guidance on layered wall construction and ground-level moisture barriers. I upgraded the road through the center of Millholt with a sub-base drainage system that would hold its surface in any weather. Millholt changed. Not dramatically, not overnight. But I could see it. The small accumulated weight of problems that had been there for so long they'd become part of how people expected things to be, suddenly not there anymore. The miller's water wheel running smooth and true. The road not washing out after the autumn rains. The barns staying dry. It was quiet and practical, and not the least bit glamorous. It was the best work of my life. And then the system gave me a new alert that stopped me cold. Primary site preparation at Valley location. 40% complete through passive soil conditioning from workshop operations. Rail corridor assessment suggests beginning tunnel survey and preliminary excavation now recommended for optimal construction sequencing. Estimated time to first operational rail segment. 14 months under current resource conditions. I read that twice. 14 months. I walked back to my valley that evening thinking about what 14 months of building towards something actually felt like. In the guild, my longest assignment had been 6 weeks on a noble family's gate renovation, and I had spent most of it being corrected by a master who visited twice and knew less about the actual ironwork than I did. The idea of a 14-month project that was entirely mine, with no Grandmaster Orvain looking over my shoulder, no guild standards board, no rank 3 journeyman restrictions on what I was and wasn't allowed to build, felt like standing at the edge of something very large and looking down. Good large. Terrifying large. Both at once. The system added, estimated first passenger capacity upon completion, 200 travelers per transit cycle. Recommended initial route length, 6.2 kilometers. 6.2 kilometers of rail line. Underground and surface. For a valley with no settlement, no roads, no infrastructure of any kind. I said, who exactly is going to ride this? The system, characteristically, did not answer that. But the valley was going to fill. I could feel it the same way I could feel the grain in a piece of wood before I cut it. Not consciously, not with data, just a certainty in the hands. The valley was good land, good water, good shelter. Once there was a reason to reach it easily. Once there was transit, people would come. I started the tunnel survey the next morning. The Corps walked me through the survey process with the same patient precision it applied to everything. I was tapping rock faces with a specialized rod the system had guided me to build, reading the vibration patterns to map underground cavern systems, soil layers, water tables. It was painstaking work. Also, weirdly, deeply satisfying. Every piece of information I gathered fit into the larger map the Corps was building in my mind. A map of what this valley could become. On the 4th day of the survey, the Corps flagged something unexpected. Mineral vein detected at depth, 23 meters, eastern ridge face. Material semi-anthracite coal concentrate. Estimated accessible volume. Sufficient for transit operations at projected capacity for 40-plus years. Extraction feasibility. High. I sat with that for a moment. The valley had fuel under its skin. This changed everything about the timeline. With an on-site fuel source, the steam propulsion system I'd been planning could run indefinitely without importing coal from the merchant routes. The operating costs dropped to almost nothing. The project wasn't just buildable anymore, it was viable. I wrote all of it in a notebook I'd bought in Millholt. Then I went back to surveying. Sheva came back at the end of the survey week. She was not alone. She had brought 4 other people from Millholt. A young carpenter named Ossig, barely 20, with clever eyes and the restless energy of someone who had run out of work to do in a small settlement. An older woman named Palette, who turned out to be a former stonemason who had retired after a joint injury and spent 3 years not building things and clearly going slowly crazy from it. 2 brothers, Ferric and Koss, who were farmers by trade, but had the body type and demeanor of people who were actually happiest when they had something large and heavy to move. "They want to help," Sheva said. She had her arms crossed in a way that suggested this was not a question. I looked at the 5 of them. Then I looked at the valley and the 14-month project ahead of me, and the tunnel survey notes stacked on my workbench. "Do any of you have anywhere else to be?" I asked. Ossig shrugged. "Millholt has 3 carpenters. All the repair work's done." Pallet said simply, "I want to hold a chisel again." Ferric and Koss exchanged a look, and then Ferric said, "We like digging." That was the beginning of the crew. I want to be clear that this was not a grand inspirational moment. There was no speech. I didn't tell them about my vision for the valley or the transit system or the future I could see unfolding in the Corps' quiet, constant guidance. I handed Ossig a materials list and told him the wood I needed for the temporary tunnel form system. I showed Pallet the stone cutting requirements for the tunnel portal arches. I pointed Ferric and Koss at the marked excavation start point and explained how the core-guided chalk lines on the ground worked. And then everyone started building. Just like that. The first month was mostly underground. The tunnel bore started at the valley's southern end, where the terrain naturally dipped, and the plan called for it to run beneath the first ridge, about 400 meters of underground passage, before emerging on the other side to connect with the surface rail corridor that would eventually run to a station platform near the river. Ferric and Koss were remarkable excavators. They developed an intuitive partnership where one was always breaking stone and the other was always clearing debris, and they kept pace better than the Corps' initial timeline had estimated. Pallet cut stone. She didn't just cut it, she sang to it, very quietly, a kind of low humming under her breath that I initially thought was absent-minded and eventually realized was how she concentrated. Her arches were flawless, precise and strong, and, without any apparent intention, beautiful. The tunnel portal that emerged at the southern end of the bore was, by any honest measure, a work of art. She had added small geometric patterns along the keystones, nothing I had specified, purely her own choice. When I saw it for the first time, I stopped walking and just looked at it. "You didn't ask me to do the decoration," she said, watching me look at it. "No," I said. "Do you want me to remove it?" I thought about it for exactly 2 seconds. "No," I said. She went back to work without another word. But I think she was pleased. Ossig built the timber formwork for the tunnel ceiling sections and the temporary support structures. He had a talent for intuiting load distribution that the Corps confirmed was accurate. The system would give me a spec and Ossig would independently arrive at almost the same solution from instinct alone. I started consulting him before I consulted the Corps on certain woodwork problems, just to see what he came up with. Sheva was, it turned out, the logistics. She organized the material runs. She managed the supply from Millholt and the 2 other settlements that slowly began to hear about the Valley Project and started sending observers and then participants. She kept a meticulous ledger in handwriting so small and precise it looked mechanical. She never asked for the title of settlement manager or project coordinator. She simply managed things and dared anyone to suggest she shouldn't. At the end of the 3rd month, the first tunnel section broke through the ridge and emerged into open air on the other side. I was underground when it happened, and the crew came through from both directions and met in the middle, and the sound of that, the slightly echoing, stone-surrounded cheer of 6 people who had built something through a mountain and proven it worked, was one of the best sounds I have ever heard. I allowed myself exactly 1 moment of just standing there and feeling it. Then I pulled out the survey notes and said, "All right, now the surface rail corridor." The surface work was faster. Once the core design grading was established and the drainage subbase was laid, the track bed itself went down in a rhythm. The system's rail design was elegant, a double-track layout with carefully calculated curve radii that would allow the eventual transit vehicles to maintain speed through corners without passenger discomfort. The track gauge, the spike pattern, the tie spacing, all of it was specified in my mind with a precision that felt like I was reading from a manual that didn't exist yet. I want to tell you about one evening in the 4th month. Not because anything dramatic happened, because nothing dramatic happened, and that itself was worth noting. It was late. The surface rail corridor was about halfway laid. Ferric and Koss had finished for the day and were sitting on one of the rail sections eating dried fruit and arguing about the best way to transport the next batch of stone from the eastern quarry, which was not even a real quarry yet, but they were already treating it like one. Pallet was sharpening her chisels by firelight with the focused serenity of someone doing the most important task in the world. Ossig was sketching, always one hand on a tool and one hand on a pencil. Sheva sat at the folding table she'd set up outside the workshop entrance with her ledger open, writing with the tiny, precise hand that I was starting to recognize from across the valley. She looked up when I came to refill my water cup at the barrel near the door. "The material supply for the next tunnel lining section is confirmed," she said. "Bertwick's cousin runs a stone-cutting operation 2 settlements east. He'll deliver at guild non-member rates, which are lower than guild rates by 30%. "How did you find Bertwick's cousin?" I said. "I asked Bertwick," she said. Then she looked back at her ledger. He seemed pleased to be asked something. I thought about Bertwick crossing his arms while I worked on his water wheel and uncrossing them when it ran true. The plums he'd set on my workbench without a word. "He's a man who expresses things by doing things," I said. "Yes," she said. "Most useful people are." She went back to writing. I stood there for a moment with my water cup. The fire crackled. Ferric was making a fairly compelling argument about oxen versus cart design. Pallet was humming. The valley was dark past the firelight, and the dark was the good kind. The kind that means empty land and open sky, and no one coming at you with documents. I thought about 5 years of guild assignments where the workshop closed at the 6th bell and everyone scattered to their separate quarters, and the halls were quiet in the specific joyless way of an institution where no one particularly wanted to be. And then I thought about this. A crew who had chosen to be here, sitting around a fire at the end of a hard day and arguing about oxen. I didn't say any of this out loud. You don't announce things like that. But I remember it. In the 5th month, 2 things arrived at the valley. They came together, the way serious problems generally do. The first was a man. He arrived at the valley entrance on a horse that cost more than everything in Millholt combined, wearing the gray and gold coat of an Ironveil Guild assessor. His name was Holt, and he had the practiced expression of someone who delivers bad news as a profession and has long since stopped feeling anything about it. "Doran of Granthos," he said, reading from a document. "Expelled member, Ironveil Artisan Guild, rank 3 journeyman. You are hereby notified that any construction activity carried out using skills or techniques developed during your period of guild membership is subject to guild intellectual property review, and that the guild reserves the right to inspect, dismantle, or claim credit for any such construction." I stared at him. "I've been out of the guild for 5 months. The review period is 12 months, he said. I thought about that for 3 seconds. The skills I used weren't developed during my guild membership. My core activated 3 days before I was expelled. Everything I've built here came from the core, not from guild training. Holt paused. He looked down at his document. "Back up at me. We'll need documentation of that claim," he said. "Interesting," I said, "because the guild told me for 5 years that I had no core, which means they have 5 years of documentation stating I had no system access during my membership. That documentation supports my claim, not yours." Holt's expression went through several stages of processing. He was smart enough to see the problem with his position, but not flexible enough to respond to it in the moment. He told me he would need to consult with the Grand Masters, climbed back on his expensive horse, and left. The second problem emerged from behind Holt's horse. A woman on foot, breathing hard like she'd been walking fast for a while. Late 30s, travel-worn, with a surveyor's satchel over one shoulder, and the look of someone carrying information that was either very good or very bad. Her name was Yenna, and she was a cartographer commissioned by a Northern Trade Consortium to find new route corridors. She had found mine. "Is this the Valley Project?" she said, completely ignoring Holt's departing horse. "The one with the underground transit corridor?" "It is," I said. "The consortium wants to buy the route rights," she said. "Today, if possible. They'll put up a wall at both ends, charge their own tolls, and you'll receive a 10% commission on revenues for the first 2 years. I looked at the valley behind me, the 5 months of work, the tunnel, the crew, Sheva's ledger, Pallet's perfect arches, Ossig's timber frames, Ferric and Koss still underground somewhere in the dirt doing whatever they did that made it all work. "No," I said. Yenna said, "I can make it 15%. "No," I said again. "Not the route, not the technology, not the project. Nobody buys this." She studied me for a moment, not with frustration, with the detached professional interest of someone recalculating. "The consortium won't drop it," she said. "They'll be back with better lawyers and worse men." "Let them come," I said. Yenna looked at the valley again, at the trackbed, at the tunnel portal arch, Palette's beautiful stonework framing the dark entrance, like something from a place much older and grander than this. "What are you actually building here?" she said. "Honestly? A transit system," I said. "And a place where people can live well." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I'm a cartographer. I know good route geography when I see it. What you're building could connect 3 isolated northern settlements to the trade networks. People would follow this line. They'd build around it." "I know," I said. "You're not building a rail line," she said. "You're building a town." I hadn't used that word yet. But she wasn't wrong. She didn't leave after that conversation. She set up a small camp near the workshop and spent the next week mapping the valley approaches, the ridge terrain, the river gradient. She never asked permission. She just started working, the way people who know their value tend to do. The crew doubled in the 7th month. Word had spread faster than I expected, carried by the suppliers from Millholt and the travelers who crossed the valley on the game trail and stopped and stared at the construction. 3 new stoneworkers joined Palette's team. A former guild blacksmith named Arvek arrived. He had left the Ironveil under his own power but with considerably less drama than I had, and he was the best at working iron I had ever seen outside the guild's senior masters. He came recommended by no one, carrying his own tools and a reputation I only heard about afterward. He introduced himself with a handshake and a single sentence. "I heard you're doing something interesting." Then he walked into the forge and started working. That was the entirety of his application. I didn't ask for more. A young woman named Tali arrived 2 weeks after Arvek. She was 17, deaf in one ear from a childhood accident with a kiln explosion, and she operated on intuition so sharp it was almost disturbing. She would position structural supports by feel and they would be within 0.5 millimeter of the core's specification every time. When I told her that, she just nodded, unsurprised, the way people nod when they're told something they already knew without knowing how they knew it. And 2 children arrived, siblings 8 and 11, with their grandmother from a flooded village downstream. The children started helping the way children do when they decide something is their business. The grandmother, Ren, small and iron-haired and absolutely immovable, became, without formal appointment, the person responsible for cooking for the entire crew and for telling Ferric off when he got reckless underground. Ferric took the corrections with complete good humor. He was constitutionally unable to be offended by Ren. Most people were. The valley had a population now, 14 people, but it had rhythm and sound and the smell of cooking and the noise of work and the particular energy of a place that knows what it's for. The system updated me in the 9th month. Rail corridor surface segment, 78% complete. Tunnel primary bore, 100% complete. Ventilation shaft integration, in progress. Recommendation: begin construction of first transit vehicle chassis within current month to maintain 14-month operational timeline. First transit vehicle chassis, the subway car. I had been thinking about this for 9 months. The Corps had given me the full specification in pieces, the way it always did. Not all at once, but as each prerequisite was achieved. Now the full picture was clear. A passenger vehicle approximately 12 meters long, riding on a 4-wheel bogie arrangement at each end, with a compressed steam propulsion system mounted beneath the floor, low clearance, highly efficient, running on the dense semi-anthracite from the Eastern Ridge coal seam. The passenger compartment would seat 40 people comfortably. Wood-paneled interior. Bench seating along the walls with a central aisle. Windows of clear resin glass, a material the Guild had never worked with, produced from local silica and a bonding compound the Corps had walked me through making in the workshop. The glass was extraordinary. It distorted nothing. When you looked through it, the world outside was more vivid, not less. I showed the final design to Ossig and Arvek in the workshop on a morning in the 9th month, laying out the Corps' specifications in a series of diagrams I'd drafted on large paper sheets. They were both quiet for a long time. Ossig said, "It's going to look like nothing else in the world." "That's correct," I said. Arvek touched one of the bogey diagrams with a finger. He had the habit of touching drawings while he thought, testing them through contact somehow. "The wheel flange tolerance on this," he said. "If it's off by more than 1/4 millimeter, the whole vehicle derails." "I know," I said. "That's why I'm going to need your best work." Arvek was quiet again. Then he looked up at me with an expression I had seen occasionally on very skilled craftsmen. The particular hunger that surfaces when a project is exactly hard enough. "When do we start?" he said. "We started that afternoon." The chassis construction took 3 months. The tolerances were exact and unforgiving. The bogey assemblies required components that had to be made, remade, and made again before they met the core's specifications. Arvek broke 2 grinding wheels and one of his personal hand tools and said things in the forge that I was grateful Ren's grandchildren couldn't hear. Ossig's woodwork on the passenger compartment frame was impeccable from the start, but the resin glass windows gave him 2 weeks of wrestling before the pour technique was right. Tali designed the ventilation grill system along the roof of the compartment, not because I asked her to, but because she spent a morning sitting very still inside the partially constructed frame and then came and showed me a sketch. The core confirmed her design was superior to what it had originally specified. I used her version. Ren, during this period, developed a specific pattern of behavior around the vehicle construction. Every morning she walked through the work area, examined progress, said nothing, and went back to cooking. Every few days she would stop and make a single observation. That seam will pull, or those bolts are stressed wrong, and every time we checked, she was right. She never explained how she knew. Tali thought Ren might have a dormant core. Ren, when I mentioned this hypothesis carefully, told me she had just worked with wood and metal her whole life, and anyone who couldn't see what she saw wasn't paying attention. I decided not to push that conversation further. In the 10th month, a guild messenger came. Not an assessor. A messenger, a young man, maybe 18, in guild livery with the travel-worn look of someone who'd been riding for days. He found me at the southern platform in the afternoon and handed me a letter with the guild seal without any particular ceremony. I already knew before I opened it that it wasn't good. The letter was from Grandmaster Orvain, not through official channels, not through the legal mechanisms the assessors had been using. A personal letter. The guild seal was there, but the tone was something else. Addressed to me by name, not by title, which the guild had never once done in 5 years of my membership. It said, "What you have built is noted. What you are building is observed. I do not write to threaten you. I write because I knew a craftsman 30 years ago who built something like what you are building, and he did not survive the attention it brought him. I am not responsible for what happened to him. I want you to understand that. But I am telling you that what happened to him was not the guild's doing alone. There are interests in this kingdom that find ungoverned infrastructure more alarming than any guild political dispute. You should know this. It was signed by Orvain personally, not Grandmaster Orvain of the Ironveil Guild. Just Orvain. I read it 3 times. Then I showed it to Sheva. She read it once, set it down. He's warning you, she said. I think so, I said. Is he the type who does that? She asked. I thought about Orvani's face on the morning they expelled me. The cold certainty in it. The way he'd called my construction a perversion without a second of hesitation. No, I said. He's not. Sheva picked up the letter and read it again. He mentioned someone 30 years ago who built something similar, she said, and that they didn't survive the attention. I noticed that part, I said. She put the letter down. If the guild didn't destroy this person, then who did? That was the question I didn't have an answer to. The question that sat in my head all through the rest of the 10th month, while the chassis began to take shape in the workshop, and the valley population grew, and everything was moving forward beautifully. The question buzzing under all of it, like a current in a wire. Who, 30 years ago, had destroyed a craftsman who built something like this, and were they still watching? The system, as usual, offered no comfort on philosophical matters. It was busy specifying the exact carbon content ratios in Arvek's bogey steel. I kept building. It was the only answer I knew how to give. In the 11th month, Yenna made a discovery that threw a cold shadow over everything. She had been mapping the eastern ridge, the same ridge that housed the coal seam the Corps had flagged, and she found something in the boundary survey records she'd obtained from the regional records office. A mineral claim had been filed on the eastern ridge, filed 3 months prior. The claimant, the Ironveil Artisan Guild, through a subsidiary landholding company. She brought it to me in the evening, the document flat on my workbench in the workshop lamplight. This is the ridge with your coal, she said. I looked at the document. The filing date was 3 months ago, 2 months before Holt had shown up at the valley entrance with his intellectual property speech. They knew about the coal seam, I said, or they knew about the valley's potential, and claimed the ridge as a precaution, Yenna said. Either way, if this claim is valid, they can legally access the ridge, and if they access the ridge directly above your tunnel, she didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. I looked at the filing date again. Something about it was wrong. Not instinct. Data. The geological survey referenced in the claim document had to have been conducted before the filing, but the survey was dated a week before the filing, and I had been in this valley for 7 months. I had not seen any surveyors on the eastern ridge. "Yenna," I said, "you're a cartographer. If someone wanted to forge a survey document, make it look like a geological survey was conducted weeks before it actually was, what would give them away?" She tilted her head. Then she picked up the document and looked at it for a long time. "The water damage pattern on the paper," she said. "This paper has been aged artificially. The fold lines are too uniform, and this notation in the margin," she pointed to a small marking I hadn't noticed. "That's a geological service prefix from a firm that didn't receive its licensing certification until 4 months ago, 2 months after this survey is supposedly dated." I stared at her. "The claim is falsified," she said. That changed everything. Falsified claims had specific remedies under Kingdom infrastructure law, remedies that, if pressed, would not only invalidate the guild's claim, but subject the filing party to significant legal and financial exposure. The guild, in trying to secure the ridge as leverage against me, had made a mistake. And now I had a cartographer with professional credentials, original survey documentation of her own, and a very clear paper trail showing exactly what they'd done. I put the falsified document in the locked box under my workbench, where I kept the most important project records. And then I went back to building the vehicle, because it was 12 months in and we had work to do. In the 12th month, we mounted the chassis on the track for the first time, and the thing that I had built from the broken axle of a merchant's cart and a core that woke up years too late sat there on the rails like it had always meant to be there, low, solid, quiet in a way that felt powerful. The way still water feels powerful before it moves. Ren walked around it slowly, all the way around, and then she patted the side of the passenger compartment with one small hand, the way you'd put a child's shoulder. "Good," she said. She said it the way she said everything. Final, certain. The first trial run happened on the 43rd day of the 12th month. No passengers, just me in the driver's position, Arvek at the pressure gauge station, and the rest of the crew stationed at intervals along the 6.2-kilometer route to observe and report. The steam pressure built slowly, the way it was designed to. No sudden burst, no dramatic roar, just a steady rising hiss and a trembling that traveled up through my boots from the floor of the driver's cab. I released the traction valve at the core's indicated moment. The vehicle moved, smooth, steady, increasing in speed at exactly the rate the core had promised. Not fast in the way a galloping horse is fast, but fast in the way water runs in a channel. Inevitable and unhurried and impossible to stop once it's going. The tunnel entrance came up and the vehicle entered without slowing, and the sound inside the tunnel was extraordinary. Not frightening, just the deep rushing echo of something moving correctly through a space built exactly for it. The resin glass windows caught the tunnel wall torches and turned them to long streaks of amber light along the compartment interior. The bench seats held solid through every vibration. The floor didn't shake. The overhead ventilation grills that Tally had designed drew clean air through the compartment even at speed. We came out the other side of the ridge into gray morning light, and the slope carried us down, and the curve arrived, and the vehicle held the rail through the curve exactly as designed, and I realized I was laughing. Not a polite laugh, the kind that surprises you, the kind that comes from somewhere you didn't know was ready to release. I heard Ferric from his observation point before I saw him, a full-throated yell of pure adrenaline from somewhere in the tree line. Sheva's voice, controlled and precise even at maximum volume, called out timing figures from her post near the midpoint marker. Tally was counting the rail joints by feel through the ground, she told me later, and they were all perfectly spaced. When I brought the vehicle to a stop at the northern end of the line, where the platform was, the simple raised stone platform with its canopy roof and its 3 wooden benches and its sign that said North Point in Ossig's neat lettering, I sat in the driver's position for a moment without moving. 14 months. A box of tools in the rain. Now this. I was still sitting there when Sheva appeared on the platform. She was holding her ledger against her chest like armor, the way she sometimes did when she was trying to decide whether to say something significant. "First passenger revenue run is scheduled for 3 days, she said. "I've already had 23 requests from Milholt." "I know," I said. The 3 days before the first passenger run were the strangest days of the whole project. Not because anything went wrong, because nothing did. The vehicle was checked and rechecked. The track was inspected end to end. The southern platform, the boarding point for Milholt passengers, was swept and its safety rail tested, and the posted timetable, hand-lettered by Ossig, was checked for accuracy 3 times by Sheva, and once by me, and once, inexplicably, by Ren's older grandchild, who pointed out a spacing inconsistency in the morning departure time, and was absolutely right. On the morning of the first run, 23 people from Millholt arrived at the southern platform before dawn. Bertwick was the last. He came alone, without his wife, wearing his good coat. He stood at the back of the small crowd and looked at the vehicle on the track, with his arms crossed, in the exact posture he'd used watching me fix his water wheel. I decided not to take that personally. I walked the platform and explained the boarding procedure, which was simple because I had designed it to be simple, and answered the questions people had, which were mostly practical. How fast would it go? Was it loud inside? What happened if it stopped in the tunnel? Then the boarding call went out, and 23 people climbed onto a transit vehicle for the first time in this world's history. I won't pretend I wasn't nervous. I wasn't showing it, but the moment the doors were sealed and the pressure began to build and I released the traction valve, every part of me that wasn't actively operating the vehicle was holding its breath. The vehicle moved. The platform fell away, the tunnel mouth came up, and from inside the passenger compartment, I heard, through the wall between the driver's cab and the passenger area, through the rumble of the bogie wheels on the track and the hiss of the steam system, something that I had not planned for and had no specification for, and that the Corps had absolutely nothing to say about. Laughter. Not nervous laughter, real laughter, the kind that comes from surprise and speed and the particular joy of being moved through the world in a way you have never been moved before. Someone cheered. Then someone else cheered. The vehicle went into the tunnel and the sound inside became that deep resonant rush I'd heard on the test run, but now it was layered with voices, and it sounded less like an empty passage and more like a place that had found its purpose. We emerged on the other side of the ridge into the morning light, and I could see, through the small window between cab and compartment, the passengers looking out the resin glass windows at the valley below the ridgeline. I brought the vehicle to the North Point platform right on the timetable's mark. 23 people stepped off. Several of them stood on the platform looking back at the tunnel entrance with the expression people wear when something has shifted their understanding of the world, and they're not quite sure how to carry that yet. Bertwick was among the last to step down. He stood on the platform stones and looked at the valley and the track and the tunnel, and then he looked at me. He didn't say anything. He reached into his coat pocket and put a third jar of preserved plums in my hand. Then he turned and looked at the vehicle and said, "Again." So we ran the route again, and again after that. 6 round trips that day, 114 passenger journeys total. The valley was never entirely empty after that. People found reasons to come. Also, Sheva said, with the very specific careful neutrality she used when she was telling me something I wasn't going to like. 2 men arrived at the valley entrance this morning. I don't recognize them, but they're wearing guild assessment coats. Not Holt this time. Different men. They had documents. Of course they did. I stepped off the vehicle onto the platform. 13 months of clean valley air and good work and the smell of the tunnel stone and the pine trees and Ren's cooking, and now guild coats at the gate again. I stood there for a moment looking back at the vehicle sitting on the track, at the tunnel entrance in the ridge behind it, at the valley stretching south, where the surface line ran clean and true in the morning light. Tell them, I said, that they're welcome to wait on the platform. Public space, but the project director is currently occupied with a successful test run, and he'll review their documents when he's ready. Sheva allowed herself the smallest smile. Project director, she said, is that what you are? Apparently, I said. She wrote something in her ledger. I didn't ask what. I walked down to the southern platform, the one at the start of the tunnel, where the valley opened up and you could see the full length of the surface track bed running back toward Millholt's direction. The 2 assessors were there, younger than Holt, both of them, with the tight expressions of men who had expected an empty valley and a confused craftsman, and were recalibrating fast. The documents they carried were more serious than Holt's. A formal injunction filed through the Royal Construction Oversight Office rather than through the Guild directly. It cited 3 separate statutes about unlicensed infrastructure development and requested an immediate halt to all construction and vehicle operation pending an official review. I read it carefully. Then I read it again. The review period specified in this injunction is 90 days, I said. During those 90 days, am I permitted to conduct operations that were underway before the filing date? The younger of the 2 assessors, The one who seemed slightly more experienced blinked. The injunction covers all operations, he said. The filing date on this document is 11 days ago, I said. The vehicle's first operational test was conducted this morning. The injunction was filed before the first operation. Therefore, there are no operations that predate the filing to continue. And since the vehicle has completed exactly one run, a test run, not a commercial operation, there is no ongoing commercial activity to halt. What come? The assessors looked at each other. What this injunction actually requires, I continued, is that I submit for review before commencing commercial operations. I have not yet commenced commercial operations. I am 3 days away from commencing commercial operations. If your review can be completed in 3 days, we have no conflict. The older assessor said, slowly, a 90-day review cannot be completed in 3 days. Then I suggest, I said, you file for an emergency expedited review. That mechanism exists within the statute. Section 14, paragraph 3. I'm happy to cooperate fully with an expedited process. They didn't know what Section 14, paragraph 3 said. I could tell from their faces. I knew what it said because Sheva had spent 2 weeks in Granthos's public records archive before any of this started, reading infrastructure law, and she had summarized every relevant statute in a 40-page document that I had now memorized. Preparation, it turns out, is a form of construction too. The assessors packed their documents and told me they would return. I was sure they would. I watched them walk back up the valley road toward the entrance trail, their gray and gold coats getting smaller in the distance. One of them turned and looked back at the vehicle once, with the expression of a man who has just encountered something he doesn't have a category for. I understood the feeling. Ossig appeared from the workshop with 2 cups of hot liquid that passed for tea in the valley. We were using dried pine bark and something Wren had found growing near the river that tasted not entirely unlike actual tea if you didn't think too hard about it. He handed me 1 cup and leaned against the platform railing, and we both looked at the transit vehicle sitting on the track. They'll keep coming, Ossig said. Yes, I said. Do you ever worry? He said. That building something people haven't seen before means spending the rest of your life defending it to people who don't want it to exist? I thought about that. The guild, the assessors, Holt on his expensive horse. Orvain's letter about the craftsman 30 years ago who didn't survive the attention. All of it stacking up the way things stack when you're doing something that someone with power would prefer you stop doing. Sometimes, I said. What do you do about it when you worry? He said. I looked at the vehicle, at the platform stones that Pallet had cut, at the sign in Ossig's own lettering that said North Point, at the tunnel entrance in the ridge, that arch, those small geometric decorations Pallet had added to the keystones, that nobody had asked for, and everyone had stopped to look at the valley stretching in every direction, the track running clean and true. I build the next thing, I said. Ossig sipped his not-quite tea. Good answer, he said. He went back inside. The valley was quiet in the way it got in the late afternoon, when the work sounds settled and the birds came back to the tree line, and the river could be heard again from this distance if you listened. Then I heard Ossig's voice from the tunnel entrance, echoing slightly, Doran. There's someone here who walked in from the north approach. I turned. Coming along the platform from the northern end was a woman I'd never seen, perhaps 30, in traveling clothes with no guild insignia, no consortium satchel, nothing that categorized her. She was looking at the transit vehicle with an expression I couldn't read. Not awe, exactly. Not calculation, like Yenna had worn. Something older and more complicated than either. She turned and looked at me directly. You're the one who built this, she said. I am, I said. I've been looking for you for 4 months, she said. Since the guild expelled you. Since word got to certain people that a dead stone had built something no core in guild records had ever specified before. I felt a pull in my chest that was not excitement or fear, but some mixture of both. What people? I said. She reached into her coat and held out a document. Not guild format, not consortium format. A seal I didn't recognize. Deep blue wax with a symbol that looked like an open compass over a set of parallel lines. The Unmapped Institute, she said. We study construction technologies that exist outside guild doctrine. Things that shouldn't be possible. Things that are possible but have no precedent. She paused. Things like what you built. The transit vehicle sat on the track behind me. The platform benches were empty. The guild assessors were somewhere down the valley road, recalculating. Wren's grandchildren were probably in the tree line watching all of this and adding it to whatever they decided the world was. And what do you want from me? I said. She held the document out a little further. We want to show you what else the core can build, she said. Things further outside guild doctrine than a rail vehicle. Things that would make the guild not just nervous, but afraid. The morning was very quiet except for the cooling tick of the transit vehicle's boiler and the distant sound of Ferric laughing about something underground. I took the document. The paper was heavy, the seal was real. I could feel the depth of the wax impression under my thumb, the symbol, the open compass over the parallel lines. I didn't open it yet, but I took it. Behind me, I could hear the transit vehicle's boiler cooling with that rhythmic metal tick. I could hear Ferric somewhere underground, laughing at something. I could hear Sheva's voice from the direction of the workshop, giving instructions to someone about tomorrow's supply run. Precise, unhurried, already 3 steps ahead the way she always was. I could hear Ren's grandchildren in the tree line above the northern platform, because they were incapable of being quiet for more than 5 consecutive minutes. All of it. The valley, loud with life. 14 months ago, this was empty forest and a river and a hawk and a fox watching me be dramatic. I looked at the woman from the Unmapped Institute. How long do I have to decide? I said. She tilted her head. Decide what? Whether to go where you're pointing, I said. I wasn't aware I was pointing anywhere, she said. I'm offering information. What you do with it is entirely your business. That was a careful answer. Maybe too careful. I filed that away. What's your name? I said. Karel? She said. I looked at the document in my hand. Then I looked at the platform. At the sign in Ossig's lettering. At the stone arch over the tunnel entrance. Palette's geometric keystones catching the afternoon light. At the crew moving in the middle distance, doing what they did, building what we were building together. And then I looked at Karel. At whatever was in her eyes. Not urgency, not desperation. Something that had been waiting a long time and was used to waiting. Something that recognized in me the same quality it carried in itself. Purpose, maybe. Or the specific stubbornness of people who keep building when the world tells them to stop. And that was when I understood. The valley, the transit line, the first passenger run, the falsified ridge claim, Orvanet's letter, the assessors and their injunction, all 114 passenger journeys. None of that was the whole story. It was chapter 1. And whatever was written in this document, whatever the Unmapped Institute knew about what a late-waking core could truly build, the next chapter was going to be something the Ironveil Guild never saw coming. I just hoped I was ready for it. Something told me I was going to have to be whether I was ready or not. If you want to find out what's inside that document and what the Unmapped Institute really wants from Doran, smash 600 likes and the next chapter drops.